Buddhist prophecy. The cycle of decline, awakening, and rebirth. The world does not usually end with fire falling from the sky. More often it fades quietly through forgetting how to listen, forgetting how to sit still, forgetting that life is fragile, temporary, and immeasurably precious. We live in an age that knows how to build faster than it knows how to bow. An age that can store the whole world in a small glowing screen, yet struggles to stay present with a single breath. Noise multiplies. Speed accelerates. Desire is sharpened and sold back to us as meaning, and beneath it all a quiet unease hums in the chest. Unnamed, unresolved, but deeply felt. Many sense it even if they do not speak of it. A feeling that something essential is thinning, that kindness is rarer, that attention is fractured, that wisdom is drowned out by endless opinion. This is not new. Long before our cities rose into glass and steel, long before information flooded the senses, those who walked the contemplative path spoke of cycles not as predictions carved in stone, but as patterns woven into the nature of mind and world alike. They understood that civilizations, like individuals, move through seasons, that clarity arises, flourishes, is neglected, and must be rediscovered again. What some call prophecy was never meant to terrify. It was meant to orient, not a declaration of doom, but a mirror held gently before humanity, asking, where are we now? And how are we living? This is not a story about the end of the world. It is a story about forgetting, remembering, and beginning again. Tonight, by this quiet inner fire, we will walk together through the ancient rhythm of decline, awakening, and rebirth, not as spectators of history, but as participants in the living moment. Not to judge the age we inhabit, but to understand it. Not to escape suffering, but to meet it with clear eyes and a steady heart. Listen not with urgency, but with patience. These words are not here to persuade you. They are here to sit beside you. Decline does not announce itself with trumpets. It arrives softly, disguised as progress. It arrives when speed is praised more than depth, when accumulation replaces understanding, when the mind becomes crowded but the heart grows thin. Decline begins not in institutions or governments, but in the unseen habits of attention, in what we repeatedly turn toward and what we repeatedly turn away from. In the ancient contemplative view, decline is not a punishment. It is not a curse placed upon a generation. It is the natural consequence of forgetting what liberates and clinging to what does not. When desire becomes the primary compass, life narrows. When craving leads, wisdom follows behind, if it follows at all. This is how decline truly begins. Not with immorality as spectacle, but with restlessness normalized. With dissatisfaction treated as a problem to be distracted away rather than understood. With discomfort numbed instead of examined. With silence avoided because it no longer feels safe. Look gently at the world around you. People are rarely still. Even when seated, the mind scrolls. Even when resting, the heart is braced for the next demand. There is little space to simply be, because being does not produce, perform, or impress. And so the inner life becomes outsourced. We ask algorithms to tell us what matters. We let comparison shape our worth. We mistake stimulation for aliveness. None of this is evil. None of it requires condemnation. It is simply the momentum of an unexamined mind multiplied across millions of lives. This is what earlier contemplatives observed when they spoke of decline. Not that the teachings vanish overnight, but that they become diluted, spoken more than lived, referenced more than embodied. Words remain, but depth fades. Ritual continues, but presence thins. Symbols survive, but their inner fire dims. The tragedy is not that people become bad. It is that they become distracted. In such times, suffering does not always appear dramatic. It appears as anxiety with no clear source, as loneliness despite constant connection, as exhaustion that sleep does not cure, as a sense that life is happening elsewhere, faster than we can catch up. This is not personal failure. It is collective conditioning. When awareness is pulled outward endlessly, the inner landscape becomes unfamiliar terrain. Many no longer know how to sit with themselves without reaching for something. A sound, a thought, a memory, a plan. Stillness begins to feel threatening because it reveals what has been ignored, and so decline feeds itself. The less we look inward, the louder the world must shout to keep our attention. The louder it becomes, the harder it is to hear the quiet voice of discernment. Eventually, wisdom sounds boring, compassion feels inconvenient, and restraint seems outdated. This is not because humanity is broken. It is because desire is persuasive. Desire promises fulfillment just beyond the next achievement, the next purchase, the next recognition. It keeps the mind leaning forward, never quite arriving. And in that leaning, we lose contact with the simple completeness of the present moment. The old teachers did not warn of decline to instill fear. They did so out of compassion, like a physician describing the early symptoms of an illness, not to shame the patient, but to prevent deeper harm. They understood something subtle, that the most dangerous suffering is the kind we normalize. When dissatisfaction becomes background noise, when unease is considered ordinary, when disconnection feels inevitable, at that point decline has already taken root. Yet even here, especially here, something remarkable remains true. Decline does not erase the possibility of awakening. In many ways, it prepares the ground. When the world grows noisy, silence becomes precious. When meaning feels thin, depth becomes magnetic. When old answers fail, the heart begins to search honestly. This is why periods of confusion often precede moments of profound clarity. In a declining age, those who suffer are not weaker. They are often more sensitive. They feel what others suppress. They sense the misalignment between how we live and what truly nourishes. Their pain is not a flaw. It is a signal. To feel unsettled in an unsettled world is not madness. It is awareness trying to wake up. The ancient view never claimed that awakening belongs only to golden ages. It suggested the opposite, that when conditions are difficult, sincerity becomes sharper. When comfort cannot distract, truth has a chance to speak. Even now, amid distraction and noise, seeds remain. Every moment of genuine kindness, every pause taken before reacting, every breath noticed instead of wasted. These are not small things. They are acts of quiet resistance against decline. Because decline is not defeated by argument or force. It is softened by presence. When one person chooses to look directly at suffering rather than flee it, the cycle begins to turn. When one person stops feeding the endless hunger for more, the wheel slows, just slightly but meaningfully. The prophecy of decline was never final. It was always paired with something else, an understanding that what deteriorates can also be renewed, that what is forgotten can be remembered, that what feels lost can reemerge not identically, but wisely transformed. The night is not a mistake. It is part of the rhythm. And somewhere within this darkness, awareness is learning how to see again. Awakening does not arrive as a revolution. It begins as a disturbance, gentle, persistent, and impossible to ignore. It begins when the old ways no longer satisfy, even if they still function. When success tastes flat. When distraction exhausts rather than entertains. When the mind, once eager to chase, begins to hesitate, not out of laziness, but out of quiet doubt. This doubt is sacred. It is not cynicism. It is not despair. It is discernment beginning to stretch its limbs after a long sleep. In the cycle of decline and renewal, Awakening does not belong to the masses first. It arises in individuals often unnoticed, often unnamed. A person pauses before reacting. Someone sits alone, without reaching for noise. Another feels suffering fully instead of anesthetizing it. These moments are small in appearance, but immense in consequence. Because awakening does not require permission from the A. It does not wait for ideal condition. It does not need the world to slow down first. It only requires honesty. Honesty about pain. Honesty about craving. Honesty about the limits of external solutions. At some point different for each person, a realization dawns. Whatever I am seeking cannot be found where I have been looking. This realization is not dramatic. It does not shout. It simply settles in the chest, like a weight that is also a relief, a knowing that the endless pursuit has been misdirected, that peace cannot be acquired the way objects are acquired, that no amount of stimulation can substitute for understanding. This is the beginning of awakening. In ancient times, this was described as turning the mind around, but it feels less like turning and more like stopping, like finally setting down a heavy bag that has been carried so long its weight was forgotten. The mind begins to observe itself. Thoughts are no longer believed automatically. Emotions are felt without immediately becoming commands. Desire is seen as movement rather than identity. Fear is recognized as sensation rather than prophecy. Nothing supernatural has occurred. Nothing has been added. What has changed is the relationship. Awakening is not about becoming someone else. It is about ceasing to be possessed by stories, possessed by habits, possessed by the idea that happiness is always elsewhere. In a declining age, this shift is radical, not because it opposes society, but because it refuses to be entirely shaped by it. The awakened impulse does not shout slogans or demand followers. It simply lives differently, more slowly, more carefully, more consciously. And this difference is felt. Others may not understand it, but they sense something steady, a presence that does not rush, a listening that does not interrupt, a kindness that does not seek applause. These are not personality traits. They are byproducts of seeing clearly. As awakening deepens, another realization emerges, one that can be unsettling at first. The sense of a solid, permanent self begins to soften, not intellectually, but experientially. Moments arise when the boundary between me and experience feels less rigid, when thoughts appear and vanish without ownership, when emotions pass like weather rather than define identity, when the body is felt as process rather than possession. This can feel disorienting. The self has been a trusted reference point. To see it as fluid, conditional, and dependent can initially evoke fear, as if something essential is dissolving. But slowly, gently, relief follows. Without a rigid self to defend, life becomes less personal. Praise and blame lose some of their grip. Comparison weakens. The endless project of self-improvement begins to relax, replaced by simple care for what is present. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy without clinging. Awakening does not remove suffering instantly. Pain still arises. Loss still visits. The body still ages. But the additional layer, the resistance, the narrative, the demand that things be otherwise begins to thin. Suffering is met, not multiplied. And something else begins to bloom naturally. Compassion, not as an obligation, but as recognition. When the illusion of separateness softens, the pain of others no longer feels distant, not because one is overwhelmed by it, but because it is understood, seen as the same patterns of craving, fear, and confusion playing out in different forms. Compassion at this stage is quiet. It does not rush to fix. It does not preach. It simply refuses to harden. In a world shaped by decline, this softness is strength, because decline thrives on reactivity, on outrage, on fear multiplied by identification. Awakening interrupts this cycle not by opposing it, but by stepping out of it. Each awakened moment is a break in the chain. This is why the ancient cycle never ends in decline. It always bends toward renewal, because even when wisdom is obscured culturally, it remains accessible personally, and personal transformation, though subtle, accumulate. One person becomes less reactive, another listens more deeply, another chooses restraint where indulgence was expected. These choices ripple, not in headlines but in tone, not in ideology but in atmosphere. Over time, these ripples intersect. Communities form, not always visibly, not always intentionally, but through shared values of presence, humility, and care. Teaching re-emerges not as rigid doctrine, but as lived example. Wisdom is transmitted not through authority, but through authenticity. This is how rebirth begins, not with the restoration of old forms, but with the reappearance of timeless qualities. Attention, integrity, stillness, compassion. The prophecy was never that the world would be saved by force. It was that clarity would reappear wherever conditions allowed, again and again, because it is woven into the nature of mind itself. Even now, amid confusion, awakening is happening quietly, in hospital rooms, in monasteries and apartments, in moments of grief that crack the heart open, in exhaustion that finally asks deeper questions. The cycle turns, not because humanity becomes perfect, but because suffering eventually teaches what comfort cannot. And as awakening spreads, slowly, unevenly, imperfectly, the conditions for something new begin to gather. Not a utopia, not a final answer, but a wiser way of beginning again. Rebirth is often misunderstood. It is imagined as a return to innocence, a restoration of purity, a golden age reclaimed from the ruins of decline. But rebirth, as understood by those who walk the contemplative path, is not a reversal. It is not a reset. It does not erase what has been learned through suffering. Rebirth is maturation. It is wisdom that has passed through loss and remained tender. It is clarity that remembers confusion and does not despise it. It is compassion that has been wounded and chosen not to close. In the great cycle of decline and awakening, rebirth does not arrive with fanfare. It unfolds quietly, through changed priorities and softened hearts. It is visible not in monuments, but in the way people relate to themselves, to one another, to the fragile world they inhabit. A reborn age does not deny impermanence. It lives in harmony with it. Those who have awakened do not seek to freeze life into certainty. They no longer demand permanence from what is by nature fleeting. Instead, they learn to love without clinging, to care without controlling, to act without grasping at outcomes. This changes everything. When impermanence is accepted rather than resisted, fear loosens its grip. Aging is no longer an enemy. Death is no longer a taboo. Loss is no longer meaningless. Each ending becomes a teacher rather than a thief. In such an understanding, rebirth does not mean endless growth or expansion. It often means restraint, knowing when enough is enough, knowing when silence is wiser than speech, knowing when presence is more powerful than action. A reborn culture values depth over speed, listening over winning, care over consumption. Not because these are moral imperatives imposed from above, but because they are recognized as conditions for well-being. This is how wisdom re-enters the world, not as dogma, not as prophecy shouted in the streets, but as lived alignment. Parents listen to children instead of projecting ambitions onto them. Leaders act with humility, aware of their own limits. Communities remember how to gather without spectacle. Technology is used but not worshipped. Progress continues but not at the expense of meaning. None of this is perfect. None of it is permanent. Even rebirth contains the seeds of future decline. And this too is understood. The awakened do not cling to rebirth as an achievement. They know that all conditions change. They know that clarity must be renewed moment by moment, generation by generation, breath by breath. This is why humility remains central. Without humility, rebirth hardens into ideology. Without humility, insight becomes identity. Without humility, the cycle begins to fracture again. The mature understanding accepts the cycle fully. Decline is not evil. Awakening is not heroic. Rebirth is not final. They are movements within a living process. This acceptance brings great peace. When one no longer demands that the world conform to personal ideals, energy is freed to respond wisely to what actually exists. Action becomes more skillful because it is no longer driven by anxiety about the future or nostalgia for the past. A reborn mind lives here, in the weight of the body, in the rhythm of breath, in the simple intimacy of awareness meeting experience. From this groundedness, compassion flows naturally, not as sentiment but as steadiness. A steadiness that can sit with grief without needing to fix it. A steadiness that can confront injustice without hatred. A steadiness that can love deeply without losing itself. This is the quiet fruit of the cycle. Not enlightenment as escape, but wisdom as engagement. The prophecy of rebirth was never about a savior arriving from elsewhere. It was about the rediscovery of what has always been possible within human consciousness. Again and again, across centuries and cultures, this rediscovery has taken different forms, but its essence remains unchanged. To see clearly, to act kindly, to let go when holding tight causes harm. Even now, this rebirth is occurring in small sanghas and solitary practitioners, in therapists who listen without judgment, in caregivers who remain gentle despite exhaustion, in artists who create from stillness rather than ego. The world may not notice, history may not record it, but life feels the difference. And that is enough, because rebirth was never meant to be universal or eternal. It was meant to be accessible, available wherever awareness meets sincerity. It always has. Worlds rise and fall, teachings fade and reappear, minds forget and remember. What matters is not where we stand in the cycle, but how we meet it. If you are living in confusion, you are not late. If you are questioning old answers, you are not lost. If you are tired of chasing and longing to rest, you are already turning inward. Decline does not disqualify you. Suffering does not make you unworthy. Uncertainty does not mean failure. They are part of the path. The ancient understanding was never meant to predict an ending. It was meant to invite responsibility, not for the whole world, but for this moment, this breath, this choice to meet life with a little more honesty and a little less fear. You do not need to renounce your life to walk this path. You do not need to adopt new beliefs. You only need the courage to look directly, patiently, and kindly at what is already here. From that looking, wisdom grows. From wisdom, compassion deepens. From compassion, the cycle gently turns. If these words have offered you even a moment of stillness, let that be enough for now. Return to them when the world feels heavy. Sit beside the quiet fire again. Walk slowly. Listen deeply. And if you wish to continue this journey, to reflect, to remember, to awaken together, you are welcome to remain here, to follow this space of contemplation and presence. As it unfolds, no urgency, no promises, just a shared path, walked one mindful step at a time.